Andy Mair on LBC.
The Ministry of Justice says it will try to pass a law in England and Wales soon in response to a campaign by the widow of PC Andrew Harper. He was dragged to his death by a getaway car 2 years ago, and 3 teenagers were jailed for manslaughter. If passed, the law would introduce mandatory life sentences for those who kill on-duty emergency workers while committing a crime. PC Andrew Harper's widow, Lissy Harper, spoke this afternoon about why she decided to lead the campaign.
And it started with a sense of feeling of injustice, feeling of anger, and this isn't right, and something needs to change. And throughout this process, I've received an immense amount of support from the public and, you know, those close to me, but also strangers who want something different for our country. And I think we want to look at our laws and be proud of it, and to be able to say, yeah, that's what should be happening.
Daw QC is a criminal barrister at Millennium Chambers and author of Justice on Trial, Radical Solutions for a System at Breaking Point. Thank you for joining us. What do you make of what will, if it's approved by Parliament, will become law?
It's just an absolute outrage. We have a situation, I mean, it's Priti Patel all over again, I'm afraid, in continuing from your previous story. Priti Patel is attracted like a butterfly to a light by any populist cause which makes her sound tough on crime. And sadly, Mrs. Harper is just being used by Priti Patel and the government to try to appear populist, appear tough on crime. We shouldn't have a society where the most tragic and difficult of cases lead to a change in the law for everyone and forever. It's not how criminal justice is supposed to work. We're supposed to make our criminal justice policy on the basis of evidence of what actually works. And what we have here, I'm afraid, is just yet more increases in sentence. We've already had our prison population almost double in the last 25 years, largely because of populist political manoeuvring. We also have longer sentences for almost all crimes than we've ever had before. The sentences for murder, for example, the average time spent in prison has almost doubled in that same period.
And what's wrong with that?
What's wrong with that is that none of it leads to a reduction in crime. It's completely misdirected and it's bad policy. All of the evidence is that where you just increase sentencing without any regard for the consequences of that, and without any regard for whether it actually achieves anything useful, what you end up with in the end is the American justice system. 2.4 million people in prison, politicians demanding life without parole, time and time again, longer and longer sentences, once again in response to populist causes, individual cases which are utterly tragic but should not form the basis for policy making. But we say in the law that hard cases make bad law. And what that means is when you take an individual tragic case, when you try and extrapolate that more generally and use that as the basis for sentencing policy, you will go wrong. And this is an example of going wrong. The defendants in this case were acquitted by a jury of murder. We already have a mandatory life sentence for murder. To introduce a mandatory life sentence for a different crime, where does that end? When do we stop having mandatory life sentences? When do we stop demanding life without parole for crime after crime? Just because people have an emotional attachment to sentences, an understandable emotional reaction to these appalling crimes, doesn't mean that the government should start legislating to lock people up for even longer than we already do.
Thank you. Daw QC, criminal barrister at Millennium Chambers and author of Justice on Trial, Radical Solutions for a System at Breaking Point.